Greetings, this is Christopher Moyer. I'm at the University of Wisconsin-Stout, talking to you from the laboratory in which we do some of our massage therapy research. And I thought I would record a short video in response to a lengthy and lively discussion that took place on Facebook and that involved several people from the massage therapy community. Specifically, I posted a comment about why does the NCBTMB organization offer continuing education credits for Reiki. My position being that there is no such thing as Reiki and that this is scientifically a trivial thing to show that there is no Reiki, and that by offering continuing education credits for something for which there is no evidence and no validity, that this undermines the profession of massage therapy and related professions. It is an ethical problem in that something that is not education is being credited as education, and by spending time and resources on this takes time and resources away from correct, accurate education and from techniques that could be being learned and mastered by people in the field that will be more beneficial both to the practitioners and to their patients or clients. Now, in the course of this discussion, Julie Onofrio, one of my friends on Facebook, she said something that she's said before in other discussions, which was, Chris, how can you say this? There is tons of research to show that Reiki works. And my response to that was, well, no, there's not tons of research. There's maybe a small amount of research, but more importantly, the research on Reiki is bad, that it typically does not have the design features you would need to test the things that Reiki assumes. A little while later, Robin Byler-Thomas entered the conversation, and she posted a couple links to a person who does some Reiki research, to a summary of Reiki research, and then later to a specific study. And some people in the discussion suggested or asked if I would eventually critique that study and maybe those materials as well. And I've been meaning to do it for a couple days, and I thought about typing it all out, and Rosemary Chunko and Reverend Sarah Trevelyan asked me if I would consider, when I eventually did it, would I post it to Poem instead of to Facebook. And frankly, I didn't know if I would have the time to type it all out given some of the other things I was doing. I thought it might be fun and interesting to record a video. I also thought it might be a little bit more efficient a little more efficient for me. So here on the massage table, I've got a couple of materials. Forgive me for being shameless, but one of the materials I have here is the book that Trish Dryden and I recently co-edited. So if you don't already know that we have got this book out there, it's out there, and we address things like research design, but also the integration of research and practice in massage therapy. That's what the book is all about. But more specifically to the Facebook discussion we were talking about, Robin provided this link to a Professor Ann Linda Baldwin, PhD, Professor of Physiology and Psychology at University of Arizona. University of Arizona is a major research university. So here we have someone who is a professor and a Reiki master, and says that she has done research that focuses on the physiological effects of mental and emotional stress. And it goes on. Now, before I get into the specific problems of specific research studies on Reiki, let me first say that this is interesting, and not to entirely call this one Professor Baldwin out, but we've got her as the specific example in this case. I would wish to note that the first thing that's problematic with Reiki research is the assumption that it makes that there is a human energy field or a human life force that another person can manipulate is that's an assumption that flies in the face of hundreds of years of previous research findings. So we're beginning from a premise which is pretty outrageous. So that needs to be put out there first, that if there is such a human energy field, and if it is able to be detected and or manipulated by other persons, that would be a remarkable scientific finding, such that it's not really sensible to just do a clinical study of when nurses or Reiki practitioners do Reiki, do people report feeling better? In fact, they might, but the reasons they might report for that might have nothing to do with a human energy field. So, frankly, it's a little surprising, more than a little surprising, that a professor at University of Arizona, who is a professor of physiology, would be so accepting of the likelihood of Reiki. So that's interesting. Now, this same Professor Baldwin has authored this plain language summary. That is, it's not a journal article, entitled Reiki, the Scientific Evidence. And in it, she details approximately, I want to say the number was 30. Anyway, she outlines a couple dozen studies that apparently support the beneficial effects of Reiki. Because this is a plain language summary, there's no detail in here on the specific studies, whether, they used correct blinding, randomization to conditions, control group, and so on. Now, if you don't know what those specific things are or why they're important, for the time being, don't tune out or be turned off by that, because I am going to talk about some specific things. I'll try not to use technical language when I say something about the specific study. But the point is this plain language summary, to someone who does not have scientific training or doesn't understand the logic of research studies, might find this very convincing. It is nicely written, it comes from a person with a PhD, and it says essentially that people have been using Reiki for hundreds or thousands of years, and in these several dozen studies it appears to work. Well, the first thing I pointed out on the discussion is nearly every one of the studies are from the same 2 or 3 journals. So from the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine, and from Holistic Nursing Practice, and then there are a couple others sprinkled in here. Here's a journal, Subtle Energies and Energy Medicine. Now, I myself, before I criticize that, I myself have published research in some fairly small, low-level journals, ones that are not widely circulated in the scientific community. So it's not, obviously, from my own perspective, it's not automatically a problem that a journal article appears in a niche journal or a journal that is oriented towards a specific class of therapies. However, if we're looking at a whole area of research, we should perhaps be suspicious when all of the articles are appearing in niche journals such as those, where the reviewers may be predisposed to think positively of a certain practice, or where the reviewers may not be especially critical of certain assumptions. That is, maybe all 2 or 3 people who reviewed one of these papers start off with the assumption that there's a human energy field that can be manipulated by another person. Whereas if these articles were sent to the New England Journal of Medicine, it's much more likely that one of the reviewers would say, wait a minute, you're starting off with the assumption that someone can manipulate a human energy field. Is there any evidence that someone can actually do that? As a side note, there have been studies, including one well-known study, in which people have tried to detect the energy field of another person under controlled circumstances, and they are not able to do so. The particular study I'm talking about is often known as the ROSA, R-O-S-A, study of therapeutic touch, which appeared in the Journal of the American Medical Association. So it's not that that has never been researched. It has been researched. The evidence showed that people could not detect a human energy field, and that paper was published in one of the premier medical journals. But on to the specific study. So after I issued my sort of blanket condemnation of this plain language summary, in which I said, well, I've looked at Reiki studies and I know that almost without fail they are not correctly designed, and so their conclusions don't have meaning. Robin, I think it was, posted a link to this specific study, which is a very short study. It's actually a research correspondence. It's just on 2 pages. And it appeared in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, so not really a niche journal, but more like a major medical journal. And the title of the article is Effects of Reiki on Autonomic Activity Early After Acute Coronary Syndrome. So very briefly, after someone has had a coronary event like a heart attack and received treatment, there is a period of days or weeks where cardiologists want to chart the heart rate variability of that person. So by heart rate variability, if your heart is beating, the heart rate variability would be a measure of how perfectly steady or metronomic your heart rate is. It turns out that a little bit of variability is actually better than if your heart is operating in a machine metronomic fashion. This probably indicates which of the branches of the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic or the parasympathetic, is predominantly driving heart rate. And more variability is an indicator of better health and better outcomes. And so in this study, what they wanted to do is they wanted to see if Reiki would increase heart rate variability. You can read this whole paper in a matter of minutes. In critiquing it though, I'm going to focus on 2 or 3 highlighted things here. So when I finally got around to reading it, I'll just tell you here. So it says, to determine whether Reiki treatment would improve heart rate variability in patients recovering from acute coronary syndrome, we randomized inpatients within 72 hours to receive Reiki, a classical music intervention, or resting control while undergoing continuous electrocardiographic monitoring. Okay, that's all excellent so far. So they are going to have 3 conditions. They are going to randomly assign people to those conditions. This is a very desirable study feature because it is usually the best way to ensure that there aren't pre-existing differences among the groups. You would like, ideally, for the groups to be exactly alike so that later, after you've done the treatment, if you see a difference, you would know that that difference had to have been the result of the treatments you're comparing. So this is all good so far. Now, at this point, we might ask ourselves, when they say that a third of these patients received Reiki, what was Reiki? And so we get to the next paragraph where it says, actually they tell us about the control condition first. It says, during resting control, patients continued to lie quietly. Okay, that's normal. In other words, they did probably what hospital patients would normally be doing. The next sentence says, for the Reiki arm, that's arm of the study, for the Reiki arm, a Reiki-trained clinical nurse placed his or her hands lightly on the subject's head and torso in 7 standardized positions. Then they go on to say that in the other arm, included meditative music with tempos slower than normal resting heart rates. So they're comparing nothing, just laying there in your hospital bed, to listening to classical music of a low tempo, to getting Reiki. Except Reiki, in this case, is having someone visit you. You see them and you know they're there. They touch you, apparently by putting their hand on your forehead in different positions. Okay, so they do this, and lo and behold, when they later analyze the data, it turns out that that Reiki condition, people who received that treatment, had better heart rate variability than the other people. That's an interesting, neat finding right there. But it's not a validation of Reiki. In fact, it's not even close to a validation of Reiki. Because what we have is we have differences between those groups that extend beyond the possibility that someone manipulated their human energy field. If someone comes to visit you, you now have companionship. If they touch you, you have got all of the physiological changes that we know are possible from skin-to-skin contact, especially skin-to-skin contact with therapeutic intent. So, person's laying in their hospital bed, the nurse, who is a Reiki practitioner, comes, spends some time with you, gives you comforting touch, you maybe share some glances with them, you feel cared for, you feel more looked after, you have the comfort that comes from being touched in a gentle and helpful way. To go from there to the possibility that what was actually happening is this person was manipulating this other person's human energy field is completely untenable in this type of study. In fact, reading this study and seeing that it appeared in what is probably a pretty good journal, I couldn't help but wonder if the reviewers of this paper had never seen the word Reiki before, and if they maybe assumed that Reiki was this hands-on practice. And maybe, I don't think anywhere in this paper does it suggest that Reiki is about manipulating human energy field. I could be wrong about that, but it's hard for me to believe that none of the reviewers would have said, wait a minute, why are you calling this Reiki? Why are you not calling this having a compassionate visit along with compassionate touch, which is all that it is. So if we're going to say that there is research that supports the benefits of Reiki, as some people I've interacted with do, we can only say that if there are studies that have been designed to test the assumptions that Reiki is founded on, namely that there is a human energy field that can be detected and manipulated by another person. And there have been examinations of that, as I mentioned, and they consistently fail to show that there is any such thing. A study such as this, in which the people receiving the treatment can see the treatment and they're being physically handled, and that is being compared to no treatment being compared to classical music, is not at all a test of Reiki. That's a test of something that has been called Reiki, but in fact involves a social visit and emotional communication and tactile, or if you like, haptic communication. So unless you separate those things out, it's really quite a leap, a completely indefensible leap, to say that what took place is Reiki and Reiki works. That's all. I look forward to seeing maybe some comments and discussing it further. Thanks.